Welcome back to Digital Futures Education. In this video, we're going to cover installing motherboards and connectors. Here we are in Module 2, installing motherboards and connectors. And now this is the new CompTIA curriculum, so it's an update from previous curriculums that have been out there as of 2025. So there are some similar parts to this to the old curriculum, but I think you will see some updates as we go through. So Module 2, installing motherboards and connectors, used to be the first module in the old curriculum. It's now the second module. So let's go ahead and get started. So learning outcomes: prepare for A+ Core 1 by explaining cable types and connectors, installing and configuring motherboards, explaining legacy cable types. So one thing that I always tell students when we're getting started and we see terms like legacy, configuration, and explaining. By explaining cable types, you want to understand what they do and what function they might perform in a troubleshooting scenario. You also want to understand components like installing and configuring, how they would go together. There's labs on these particular items. And then also explaining legacy cable types. So the term legacy is in the past, older style of types of connectors that you may still see in the field but have been a little outdated now. So there's newer versions of things. So just to understand what some of that vocabulary means. Lesson 2.1, cables and connectors. So personal computers. Components housed within the system case. Peripherals. External components that add functionality to a system. That can be a keyboard, a mouse, a printer. When you see the term peripherals, that's what that means. So here we have a personal computer, and of course it says front, access to disk drives, power switch, and LEDs. May also have peripheral ports. Air vents need to be kept clean. And you can see optical disk drive, unused optical drive bays, front I/O panel, audio and USB, power button, temperature display on case, fan vents for airflow. So they just show you this to get an idea of your basic desktop PC, what it might look like from the front. Then we have from the rear, access to power plug, power supply, rear peripheral ports. May also have expansion card access, air vents, exhaust hot air and dust from the system. You should keep those clean. Power supply with fan, as you can see right here in the back. That's the power where the power is plugged in. There's a fan. Chassis, fan, airflow cutout, where you'll see the holes where the air can come out. Motherboard I/O panel, input output panel, where you'll see where the motherboard connects to an input output. And then we have expansion card slot in use, expansion card slot not in use, where you'll see it has a cover. So you'll see expansion card slot with the slot filled and then one without it filled. And as you go deeper into chapters with CompTIA on computer parts, of course, more details than this slideshow. These slideshows are great, but they are not the only thing you should be using in order to prepare for the exam. They're great reminders and ways to review how confident you feel with the material. So peripheral devices, interfaces, ports, connectors, data storage and transfer unit of measure, bytes versus bits, conversions between units of measure, kilo to mega to giga to tera to peta. So with peripheral devices, interface, ports, connectors, you're basically reviewing different types of ways peripherals connect to the computer. And also with the way, with computers connecting to the computer, you're also starting to think about transfer rates of data and how other connectors interface with computers. So we have bytes versus bits, data storage and transfer units of measure. So bytes versus bits, conversions between units of measures, kilo to mega to giga to tera to peta. And just beginning to get that vocabulary started. Here, additional slide for peripheral devices. We have an example of a portable hard drive and a computer tower case. So we have, and the cable on the right side here is a USB 3.0 connector, and you see that the US 3.0 port, which they're identifying as here on the computer tower case, has that blue line on the inside of the USB port. That's how you can understand and identify a 3.0 port. And then on this side, we have a USB micro connector with a portable hard drive that has a USB micro port. Now, these are becoming a little less common now with as much USB-C out there, but this is still a very common port, and especially with portable hard drives. So they're just giving you a very basic view of how connecting this device to a computer requires different inputs and outputs with cords and cables that will have different connectors at the end of them and serving different purposes for the sake of data. Universal serial bus cables, standard for connecting modern peripherals, audio, video, printers, storage, input and output, power and data, length 3M, 5M. All right. So universal serial bus cables, USB cables. So here we have another slide on USB cables. Cable connectors can be same on each end and provide conversion between connector types. Slower data speed than 3.0. So this is the USB 2.0. So we have type A, type B mini, and type B micro. So what you want to recognize here is just what the size of them are and how different they look. And you can probably recognize a couple of these are pretty familiar. Type A, and then we have the type B, which you can see with a lot of older printers. And then type B mini, which is a little bit rounded at the top. And then the type B micro, which is flatter and the same size as the other mini. Well, close to it, a little wider. But ultimately they make the point here that it is slower data speed transfer than the 3.0, which is the most common now, USB 3. USB cables, slide 2 of 3. Faster data transfer and higher power. USB-C is being mandated for mobile electronics, including smartphones and tablets. So here we have a little bit of the type A, type B micro. So you see the different types of connections. Type A, this is 3.0 and 3.1, and then you have type B, which is a much different connector. And then we have type B micro, which you can see has almost like two separate little parts. And then type C, which you're probably familiar with, very common right now. So here we have the USB standards, 1.0, 1.1 to 1.5 megabytes. Here we have the USB standards with 1.0 being 1.1 to 1.5 megabytes or 12 megabytes per second, 2 being 480 megabytes per second, 3.0 being 5 gigabytes per second, 3.1 being 10 gigabytes per second, 3.2, and there's different generations, being the 1, 2, and 2x2 is 5, 10, 20 gigabytes per second, and 4 being 40 gigabytes per second. Display types, LCD, IPS, TN, VA, OLED versus Mini LED. So we're going to dive into these a little bit. Display components, touchscreen, inverters, pixel resolution and refresh rates. Cable connector can determine image quality. So that's very true. One thing you're going to learn is that the choice of cable connector, VGA versus DP versus HDMI, is going to depend on, DP is also DisplayPort, is going to change the image quality on the output. Also pixel resolution and refresh rates. All right, so there's some variables here with display components. HDMI and DisplayPort video cables. So HDMI, audio and video transfer all in one cable. Versioning, high quality resolutions, color contrast, and refresh rates. Single cable versus multi-cable connection. DisplayPort. Here we have audio and video capable, professional quality resolutions and high refresh rates, popular with gamers and graphic designers, multiple displays with single connector, daisy chaining off the same single connector, sync video and audio. So just some differences between HDMI and DisplayPort. And as you go through and study and prepare for the CompTIA and especially in the Core 1, you're going to want to know the differences between these cable types. Thunderbolt interface, version 1 and 2. Used Mini DisplayPort interface, up to 20 gigabytes per second and daisy chaining. Then we have Thunderbolt interface, slide 2 of 2. Version 3, USB-C interface, 40 gigabytes per second over a 0.5 meter cable. Version 4, USB-C interface, 40 gigabytes per second. Version 5, USB-C interface, high-speed connection for future use. Now we're talking about the Lightning interface. It's an Apple proprietary connector for the iPhone and iPad, and it's being replaced by the USB-C connectors. But it is important to be familiar with that connector and understand what it looks like, especially on legacy Apple devices. Lightning interface. Serial Advanced Technology Attachment Interface. Standard for internal storage. Smaller connector and faster data transfer. Revision 1, 1.5 gigabytes per second. Revision 2, 3 gigabytes per second. Revision 3, 6 gigabytes per second. So let's take a look. Serially Advanced Technology Attachment Interface. Here we have the data cable, what that looks like, shape and size, looking at the port. And here we have the power cable with the port size and multiple cables. So this is going to be important when you start to take apart a computer and start to look at the internals and the cables connecting data devices for power. Serially Advanced Attachment Interface, slide 3 of 3. Here we have a legacy PCIe IDE port, and we have the front view of 6 SATA ports right there off the back. SATA ports. That's what they look like, all 6 together. Then we have Molex power connectors. You definitely want to remember what Molex power connectors are. It's a 4-pin connector, red 5 VDC, yellow 12 VDC, and black is the ground. And as you go through CompTIA A, you're going to want to start to take notes on different connectors and what they are and their differences in speed and also what their purpose is. External SATA uses E-SATA connector, internal and external SATA cables not compatible. Max cable length up to 2 meters on external SATA connectors. So let's hop into what potential labs are going to be, what the potential labs for these different areas are going to be. So the first one is explore the lab interface, and you're going to see a lab on installing USB devices. Additionally, there's a lab for setting up a desktop computer. And so the first lab is essentially get you familiar with the lab interface inside the CompTIA curriculum that's available. And then there is an install USB devices lab. And then there's one for how to properly set up a desktop computer. Now, to review the lesson on cables and connectors, we want to remember there are personal computers. We looked at what they look like from the front and from the back. The peripheral devices. What are peripheral devices and how do they function and what the purpose is. Universal serial bus cables, USB standards, display types, display components, HDMI and DisplayPort video cables, understanding the differences, Thunderbolt interface, what that is, and the Lightning interface and what that is. Additionally, you want to understand the Serial Advanced Technology Attachment Interface, Molex power connectors, and external SATA. And I will say at this point, in reviewing this curriculum versus the older curriculum, they are kind of simplifying how the information is being relayed in terms of the cables to focus on. So now let's go into 2.2, motherboards. Motherboard functions. Provides data and power bus connectivities between hardware components. The system clock provides timing. And some of the leading manufacturers of motherboards are Acer, ASRock, Asus Tech, BioStar, Intel, and MSI, which are names you're probably familiar with if you've been working with computers. Motherboard functions. So here is really a breakdown between the most volatile and the least volatile being slowest also, and most volatile being fastest, with RAM here in the middle, mass storage below it, removable storage below it, and above it we have a CPU, central processing unit, and the cache. So in terms of volatile memory, the CPU with the RAM. So the RAM is very volatile, running it's a lot of movement of memory and data between the CPU and the RAM. The least volatile memory is the mass storage and the removable storage. It's essentially where it's getting stored and kept. If the computer is powered off, essentially, it can be stored on a mass storage device. And that's one way to think about it. Non-volatile memory needs power, needs a computer being on, using a CPU, using RAM to operate the processes of the computer. When the computer is off, say you're saving a file to a location, that's a very low volatile, slow process that can be done on the mass storage device. And that's some of the differences in memory function. Electrical safety and ESD. So this is particularly if you're working with computers and computer parts, you need to be aware of electrostatic discharge. That is where your body creates electricity that can damage the parts of the computer when you're touching them. So you want to make sure you understand electrostatic discharge, understanding what a grounding strap and mats are helpful for, electrically safe workbench, and parts stored in ESD bag. So just some tips here to get you beginning to think about what's it like to work on computer parts. And here is a picture of electrostatic wristband, electrical safety and ESD, which you're going to actually have a lab where you learn about handling the parts and why that is necessary. Then we have the motherboard, CPU, and system memory connectors. So we have a CPU socket, system memory slots, which can be for DIMM, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4, DDR5 RAM. So we have a CPU socket, and then we have memory slots for RAM. Here we're going to see the motherboard, CPU, and system memory connectors. You can see the memory slots here. We'll start at the top, slots for the memory. Then we have the M2 drive connector. And then we have the SATA disk drive connectors for the SATA cables. And then we have card slots for an adapter right here. And then we have the I/O ports, the input in and input out ports for USB, video, audio here. And then we have the CPU socket, which is right there with the CPU in it to hold down the central processing unit of the computer. So you're just getting familiar with the memory board and the location of where the memory slots are for RAM, the M2 connector, the SATA disk drive connectors, the adapter card slots, and the input-output. Motherboard storage connectors can exist of SATA, M2, and E-SATA. Motherboard storage connectors, so that's that slot we were just looking at, and that is a piece of RAM. Peripheral Component Interconnect Express Interface, PCI, PCIe, version 2, 6, times 1, times 4, times 8, times 16, and it has backwards compatibility. So PCI Express Interface. So with the PCI Express Interface, you see we have the times 16 slot here, then we have the times 8 PCI slot here, times 1 PCI slot here, and a regular PCI slot here. Legacy connector, and it's not compatible with PCIe slots, so just remember that. The PCI interconnect interface is not compatible with PCIe slots. PCI interconnect interface, peripheral component interconnect interface. Here we have a dual voltage 32-bit PCI sound card. And you can see the connectors here, 5 volt here, 3.3 volt here. So motherboard form factors is an important thing to know about. And basically what these are just different sizes of boards that the components can be put onto. So we have ATX, which is 12 times 9.6, 12 inches. Then we have 9.6 times 9.6, essentially a square. And then we have a MATX micro, 9.6 times 9.6, essentially a square. Then we have another square, a Mini-ITX, 6.7 times 6.7. So this is a good example of why the curriculum needs to be updated, because there are changes in motherboard sizes and standards. So we have ATX 12 times 9.6. ATX micro is still a square, but it's 9.6 times 9.6. And then we have the Mini-ITX, which is a smaller square. So just important to know the form factors. Motherboard installation. So an important thing to know and always get a chance to do a computer build, like putting a computer together, taking it apart, understanding the parts. And particularly with a motherboard installation, you definitely want to review the documentation of any particular motherboard, installing the I/O shield, installing the standoffs, pre-install the CPU and memory, align and secure the motherboard, final assembly, and also how to manage the cables. So important parts of that process. So here we have the motherboard installation. You can see this blue board is the motherboard, and this person's using a screwdriver in the corners to start to remove the motherboard from the standoffs. Motherboard headers and power connectors. So headers provide power, HDD activity lights, audio ports, and USB ports. Power connectors, main P1, and also fan connectors. Motherboard headers and power connectors. So we have front panel headers, we have 9-pin USB headers, and audio headers. So you can see these headers right here with connectors for motherboard headers and power connectors. Audio, 9-pin USB, and front panel headers. Now we're talking about video cards. Video cards can be expansion cards, GPU, dedicated graphics memory, or video ports. So different ways to have video integrated with your computer. So here's a graphics video card, GPU. We have a DisplayPort port here. We have HDMI ports that can run off of it, and DVI ports right there. And it's designed to, form factor wise, to fit into the slot in your computer. Capture cards. These are used for recording video off of other sources, basically capturing video feeds. If you're doing gaming, you're recording the screen. HDMI streaming, TV tuner cards, and internal versus external types of capture cards. Sound cards. We have audio jacks 3.5, which is the traditional size of a regular audio jack. On the back of a computer, the green is the audio out, the black is audio out, blue is audio in, pink is audio in for a microphone, orange audio out for a subwoofer. And sometimes those names can be hard to read on a computer, but sometimes we'll do some testing until it works. So just the pink one, very common, plugging in a microphone into the back of a computer, running audio out to another speaker. Sound cards. Here is the sound card with the color of audio as it's audio in, the mic in. We set the pink, audio out, and here what it looks like on the back of the card. Blue, pink, green, black, yellow. Network interface cards. Copper. We have the RJ11, RJ45. You definitely want to become familiar in coaxial. You definitely want to become familiar with what's the difference between RJ11, RJ45, and coaxial insert inputs. Copper, and then there's fiber optic, and then wireless interface cards. So as you'll get deeper into understanding what's on the exam, RJ45, RJ11, and Coax. Here we have the network interface card, RJ45 ports, which for a networking cable, like an Ethernet cable connection. So this can be used as a network adapter so that the device can have a networking card if it does not have an internal one to connect to a wired or wireless network. So the lab activities that are part of learning this information within the CompTIA course is going to be in choosing and installing a motherboard, which is an appropriate motherboard for a system, upgrading a video card to handle more graphics capability. So the lesson review on motherboards is essentially understanding the motherboard and its function of holding the CPU, holding RAM, input-output ports, the video card, and basically it's the brain of the computer is held on the motherboard. So how does it get screwed down? How does it get taken off? How do you add more RAM? How do you make updates to the motherboard? All important parts to understand within CompTIA A. Also electrical safety issues and electrostatic discharge. Motherboard, CPU, and system memory connectors. Motherboard storage connectors. How you're going to connect an external storage device. Peripheral component interconnect express interface, PCIe versus PCI. What's the difference in motherboard form factors between a mini and a regular sized motherboard of the ATX style? What do you need to know about a motherboard installation is an important component, and motherboard headers and power connectors, and how is it going to get powered. So another area to review is video cards, capture cards, sound cards, and network interface cards. So just want to make sure you know what those items are. So our last section here, a very important section, just so you kind of have a broad base in cables, is legacy cables, section 2.3. DVI and VGA video cables. Digital video interface for DVI, video graphics array, analog serial video. You've seen these, they're just not coming out on new computers, so they're definitely older. So here's our DVI A, DVI D, DVI. You'll see a range of these different DVI connectors potentially out there in the wild. Then you have DVI and VGA video cables. So you might see one just like this with an input like that. And then you have serial cables. RS-232 standards, DB9 used device, the DB25, Windows COM port. So you might see one that just looks like that. It's kind of a reverse of the other one in terms of the shape. Like this one versus this one. So just note that. Adapter cables, active, passive, video adapters, USB hubs, USB adapters to other interfaces. So there are a number of adapters that can support legacy cables. So you just want to make yourself familiar with what those are. Which ones are active, which ones are passive, how are you going to adapt video to a wide range of uses, in case you're using an older system and you want to project onto a newer system, if you can, and also the resolution that comes along with that, especially with video. So there's going to be selecting and configuring dual monitors as a lab activity, and then setting up an AV workstation as an activity. So two important labs are just basically understand how to connect to multiple monitors and setting up an AV workstation, and also being sure you get the right resolution off potentially older cables. Lesson review: legacy cables, DVI and VGA video cables. Understand their differences, what they look like, understand that they're legacy, that they're not going to be coming out with new ones, but you may end up coming into contact with them. Serial cables, and also what are the range of adapter cables that are out there. So in short, that closes up motherboards and connectors, some of the key information that you want to know for CompTIA A Plus Module 2 in Core 1. Thanks for watching the video, and keep checking out more.